This is how to make Freshie beads that last. I'm doing it this way in PowerPoint because I found when I was really trying to get used to making Freshies, I kept circling back around to all of my videos that I've watched, right? And I was trying to get those details, but I had to skim through and listen to what they were saying. And I wanted to give you something visual, so you can either screenshot these right now, or when you're ready to come back and see what you need to see, they'll be here to easily just skim through and pause and look at it that way. So, for the materials you're going to need are fragrance beads, fragrance oil, your mica powders, your scale for weighing, and your mason jar, along with masking tape. Some people weigh and some people use a measuring cup and a tablespoon, but I prefer to use weight. So when you're using the scale, you need to place your jar onto the scale like this. You have a couple options. First, if you go ahead and place your cup or your jar on top of your scale, if you turn it on with it already there, it's gonna start off as 0 and it's already gonna be tared. But if you already have it on and it says 0 and your jar is not on there, then when you add your jar, you are gonna have some weight to that. So then you'll wanna tear it out so that it's at 0. You'll also wanna make sure that you're on ounces because that is the measurement I'm using, but I will be going based off of ounces in this video. I do a 2-to-1 ratio, which is 2 ounces of beads for 1 ounce of fragrance oil. So if I'm going to do 4 ounces of beads, I'll do 2 ounces of that fragrance oil. You want to make sure to shake really well. Shake until everything is fully saturated to ensure the oil is dispensed evenly and each bead absorbs. Don't add your mica powders at this step. You want to wait until you shake it up, so that way the fragrance oil attaches to the mica powders, not the mica powders attaching to the fragrance oil. No. So that way you have your fragrance oil attaching to your beads and your mica powders on top of that, instead of your mica powder attaching to the beads and your fragrance oil trying to penetrate with that mica powder providing a barrier. So for mica powders, I find there's no exact measurement for mica powders. It really just depends on what you're looking to do. Are you looking for something more vibrant, more subtle? What is your goal here? You want to add a little bit at a time. So less is more. It's easier to add more than it is to remove the excess. While you can remove excess by adding in more beads and shaking it together, letting it transition off of there, but I prefer to honestly less is more and try to avoid that at all costs. So I do like to add my colors before baking. What I do add when I'm making my fragrance beads is something iridescent and pearly. I like that base look of just shiny. I don't know, I just think that it looks a lot nicer. And then that way, when I want a full color, what I'll do is I will measure out what I need for the specific Freshie that I'm making. And I will do little batches of color after they're made right before I bake. Like in this video where I'm shaking just a little bit up in a cup to disperse that mica powder before I put it in my mold to bake. The reason I do it this way is because if I wanted to make a jar of each color in the fragrance, you have to keep in mind that for every fragrance you have, you need a different jar. And if you're going to have different colors in each fragrance, you're going to need a different jar per color per fragrance. So if you do black, white, red in orange sherbet, you need 3 jars. If you want that also in pumpkin spice, you need 6 jars. Find it best, I just do a white base, pearly color, and add in my colors later. Do keep in mind that if your fragrance oil is colored like my orange sherbet, then you want to put in a color that is on the same side of the color wheel. So if that's a warm color, you want to put another warm color. So if it's orange, you can put in a yellow or a red. And if it's blue, you would have fine luck with doing a green or a purple. So you want to keep your color theory in mind. But typically, if I have something that's colored, I try to just make things that are that color. Or for my orange sherbet, I was making a duck and I added in a little bit of yellow and it was the perfect base for that yellow. But what I did for my orange sherbet was I added in this sheer iridescent color that was magical red, and when it shimmers it has a little bit of a red undertone, which you could get by if it was a blue undertone or a green undertone, but it's gonna look a lot better if it's the red. So when you add your mica powders, you want to shake, shake, shake until all the powders are evenly dispersed. This is crucial for achieving a uniform look. That way you don't have beads that are uncolored when you go to bake them, which is noticeable. And you don't have ones that are too dark or splotchy, which is also noticeable once they bake because they melt and they combine, and then you see all the little individual pieces. I previously was labeling them by writing on the top of the jar, but then I found as I was adding in more scents that I really needed to add in a labeling method that was removable, because I do reuse my jars, and if it's a similar scent I don't really wash them in between, but I do wash them in between if it's a different type of scent. So if I'm going from fruity to like a seasonal Christmassy scent, then I will go ahead and wash that jar. So what I do is put masking tape on the very top of the lid, and I add fragrance name as well as the date I created it. That way I can keep track of how long it takes to dry and then how long it's been curing, and I'll know when I can use that scent, as I'll know when it is fully done making. And your storage tip is to clean the jar between using different scents to prevent altering the smell of the next fragrance. So if you're going to use orange sherbet and then later on you want to use a cinnamon scent in that same jar, because I don't want to buy a million jars. I don't have space for a million jars. At that point would wash that jar. If I'm going to do orange sherbet and then I'm going to do cotton candy, I don't think it's going to be a big deal to not wash it. It hasn't given me any issues. Okay, for the first 24 hours, please babysit your Freshies, because you're going to shake them, shake them, shake them, and flip. Every time you walk past them or every hour, if you look at it and you see that there's a puddle of fragrance oil setting on the bottom, then you want to shake it and flip it. I do that for the first 24 hours. I like to set mine in high traffic areas because I will forget to do that, and I'll come back, and every time I walk past them, like say the kitchen, every time I walk past the kitchen, I'll shake it and I'll flip it. After the 24 hours, you'll just need to flip the beads. You shouldn't have to shake them unless they do have that puddle gathering at the bottom, in which point I would go ahead and shake them. You can stop flipping them once they're fully dry. So if you're shaking them and then they don't stick to the sides of the jar, they're good, they're dry. You can speed up the drying by wrapping the jar in a heating pad or placing it in a warm room. Some people wrap it up in a heating pad, while I put mine in the bathroom and turn on the heater in there. This can half the amount of time it takes to dry. There is a difference between curing and drying. Drying is when it stops sticking to the side of the bottle when you shake it, whereas curing is the time that it sits after it's dry. I personally say it is good 7 days after the time it stops sticking to the side, or 10 days from the day you make them. This is where I've found optimal results. I haven't noticed much of a difference going past that amount of time, but I have noticed if I bake them too soon, they're not as strong. So just like when you're melting your wax melts, you are getting that scent throw because it's melting. The heat is activating that. It's releasing it into the air when it's evaporating. Well, when we're making our Freshies, we bake them. When we're baking them, we're melting them. Then there is that heat activation where it's evaporating and your house smells really good. So it is releasing that fragrance. And I feel like letting them sit for the 10 days or the 7 days after they dry allows for them to fully absorb, so there's no fragrance oil floating on the outside of the beads, which is what would be evaporating. We want that to be embedded really well. If you want to see a video of me making these Freshies, either from start to finish or just, already having the fragrance beads and how I make them in molds like cookie cutter molds or the silicone molds, if you want to see how they're painted or glittered, please let me know and I will definitely do that. Like and subscribe to follow along.